Is there any such thing as objective morality? Well, J. Warner Wallace thinks so, but he's a religious con man, so I don't know how seriously we can take that. I'd love to see anybody be able to defend the idea with actual evidence, but the second that requirement comes up, they all just tend to run away. Funny how that works, isn't it? A little while ago, I did a video on William Lane Craig's completely empty claims on objective morality, and I wanted to make this kind of a series. So here's J. Warner Wallace trying to do the exact same thing, and he's not going to say anything remotely intelligent either, because this is J. Warner Wallace, and intelligence is not something that he does. The entire concept is absurd on its face, whether you use religion as an excuse or not. Morality, it just isn't objective. It never has been, and it never will be. And this will be just more evidence to throw on the pyre. Not that the religious give a damn about reality or not, but what the hell? Let's go take a look.
Are there such things as objective moral truths?
Not that we can tell. Now, let's start off, before we let Wallace run around with the goalposts, with defining a few things. Objective moral truths must be, obviously, objective, moral, and in fact true. Each of those needs to be independently validated, completely separate from the others. Objective, by definition, means something that exists entirely beyond the mind. It cannot be the conclusion made by any intelligent agent. It must exist as a product of nature itself. And that's why when the religious proclaim that God made objective morals, that's a sure sign that they've got no clue what the hell they're talking about. Objective morals would have to exist beyond God's mind as well. Otherwise, it's just as subjective as if we came up with it, which in fact, we did. Words mean things for a reason, folks. Let's try to remember that. Secondly, it has to be moral. That means that it has to be concerned with the principles of right and wrong behavior and the goodness or badness of human character. Well, how exactly do we determine right and wrong or good and bad? That's really a good question, and the religious are really good at simply declaring things good or bad without being able to back any of it up. How do they know it, and how do they demonstrate it? Remember, we're looking at objectivity here, things that are actually so in the real world that we live in. It's not just a claim, it's got to be backed up. Finally, it has to be true. Great. Now demonstrate it. Again, by definition, is that which is true or in accordance with fact or reality. If it's in accordance with fact or reality, then it must be demonstrable. Simply declaring something to be true without having the capacity to back it up is, in fact, circular. True is true because it's true. But that doesn't actually mean anything, does it? So let's see if Wallace can do any of this at all. And I wouldn't be holding my breath on any of it.
I think sometimes it's hard for people to wrap their minds around the idea that moral truth is not a matter of opinion, not a matter of either personal opinion or cultural opinion, group opinion, the opinions of a society or a culture.
In fact, it can't be the opinion of a god either, and that's where they tend to run into a whole lot of problems. Objectivity requires complete mind independence, and that's any mind, anywhere. The religious can't get that part through their heads, though, because God is some magical being that doesn't have to obey any rules. But that's just nonsense, and objective morality would have to be beyond any individual, culture, society, etc., etc. But it would also have to be beyond any god. And I'm willing to bet that Wallace won't understand that, But let's give him a chance to hang himself, because that'll be fun.
The idea that these things sit outside of opinion and exist on their own and they transcend every culture, could that be true of moral truths?
Yeah, but you haven't shown that there are any moral truths. Sure, there are things that we as individuals or as societies or as cultures consider true, things that are useful for humanity and thus we place value in them, but that doesn't mean they're actually true. That just means that they're handy. This is why I said that you have to evaluate the claims as stated, and so far, Wallace isn't doing very well, is he? How are they moral truths when you can't show that they are, in fact, true? Define your terms here, and I'm going to hold you to it. Because I'm betting that he'll never explain any of it, because in reality, he doesn't really care. He's just got an audience to fleece.
Well, let me just try to give you a quick way to respond to that. I think one thing sometimes people need is an example of something that transcends personal or group opinion. So let's just supersize it, okay? If we said it's never okay to torture babies for the fun of it, I think that most people would recognize that as an objective, transcendent moral truth claim.
Except it's not. It's a determination that most people make internally because they have a strong emotional reaction to it. And that's exactly why the religious love to use that as an example, because they know that most people will have an instinctive gut reaction. That doesn't mean that that gut reaction comes from outside of their own head. We are a product of evolution, and one of the things that evolution has programmed into us is an instinctively protective nature over our offspring. It's what keeps humanity going generation after generation after generation. Not all animals have that, though. Many species just drop their offspring in great quantities and pay them no further mind. If you could ask one of those creatures these questions, they'd have a completely different response. This is just Wallace playing on the emotional nature of their human audience. This is just more religious dishonesty. I trust nobody's surprised.
In the sense that if you saw somebody or met somebody who said, no, in my personal opinion, it's perfectly okay to torture babies for fun, you would say, dude, you need to get some help.
And that's exactly the reaction that he's looking for. This is all too common. It's people so completely emotionally wedded to their positions that they can't even imagine that anybody might think anything different. Everyone has to be just like they are, and if they're not, then there's got to be something wrong with the other guy, right? It can't be you, it's got to be them. And this goes beyond religion. Try telling a lot of people that you're perfectly okay with suicide. Everyone has a right to self-determination, and if they don't want to live anymore, well, that's A-okay with you. Because lots of people are going to say the exact same thing that Wallace just tried, because it's an emotional defense mechanism. It's so far outside of their personal comfort zone and what their culture has told them all along that they'd rather cast aspersions than actually have any kind of intelligent conversation. None of this is about intelligence after all. It's all just fee-fees.
It's not a matter of us trying to convince you that that's so patently obvious on its face that we would call somebody who denies such a claim. As a matter of fact, I'll give you a little trick here. It turns out that yes, all kinds of moral acts can be properly justified. But you can remove all justifications and you will find the objective, transcendent moral principle that lies at the heart of the matter. So for example, is it okay to steal? Well, if you're stealing the code that someone's trying to use to kill 1 million people, I suppose you could probably find a way to justify. And we in Scripture know that if you are trying to repel an attack, that someone is trying to kill you, you can do certain things you wouldn't be able to do otherwise and morally justify. If you're trying to save the lives of innocents, you are able to do certain things you would not be able to do otherwise. But if I simply add to the end of the claim, is it ever okay to steal for the fun of it? Now I've removed all the justifications.
And you notice what he's doing here, right? He's saying that it's okay to do things if you can justify it, But that's not what the Bible says, is it? The first commandment says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." Well, what if someone's going to kill you and your family if you don't reject your God and adopt another? Well, you might be saying, well, just go ahead and do it. Don't be serious, but just say you're going to do it. But isn't that just a lie? Don't the Ten Commandments say something about bearing false witness? In fact, if you go to Proverbs, it says that God hates certain things, going so far as to call them abominations. One of them, listed in Proverbs 6:19, says, "A false witness that speaketh lies." Yet, lots of theists have found lots of ways around that over the years, haven't they? There are others who say that one should never lie, right up until you get backed into a corner, and then they'll find a way to rationalize their way around that too. So this just doesn't hold any water in any way, shape, or form. And I hope nobody's surprised, because this is really common among the religious.
I'm not stealing so I can save innocent lives. I'm not stealing so that I won't be killed. I am stealing now for the fun of it? I've removed all the justifications. Now you've found the moral, objective claim at the base of the claim itself.
Except you haven't. You've just arbitrarily removed all of the justifications that you find acceptable until you get to the one that you don't. This is purely subjective. Just because lots of people agree with you, that doesn't make it true. This is really why so many people go so wrong when it comes to talking about objective morality, because they can't get out of their own heads to evaluate their claims independently. He's saying this both because he's not capable of critical thought, but also because it makes him money. Because Wallace, as is no surprise, is a complete hypocrite.
I've removed all justifications. Is it okay to kill for the fun of it? To lie for the fun of it? You just add "for the fun of it" to any of these acts, and you have now gotten to the core of why it is objectively true.
No, you haven't. Is it okay to believe in a God just for the fun of it? That's effectively all you're doing, after all. You have no evidence for any of it at all. You don't actually care if it's true. It just makes you feel good to think that there's a magical man in the sky watching over you, because you are terrified of being personally accountable for your own actions. So, there goes that justification, right? What else do you have? Nothing? That's what I thought.
That it's not okay to lie for the fun of it because you've removed all possible justifications.
No, just the ones you don't personally accept. Again, we're right back to subjectivity, and Wallace doesn't know what any of these words mean. He's also making videos for people who don't understand what these words mean, because that's the whole point. He wants the dumb people with fat wallets and not a lot rattling around in their heads, to give him money. Because, of course he is. Is it any surprise that he's not getting anywhere intellectually valid when he completely misunderstands the context and the facts about the conversation?
And I think most of us would recognize, yet those are objective, they transcend all cultures. It's not okay to torture babies for the fun of it.
Yeah, tell that to the Moloch worshippers who used to roll babies into the belly of a red-hot idol. Seriously, infanticide is very, very common worldwide, and it always has been. Female infanticide in China is insanely common today. According to studies, infanticide among female infants is responsible for up to 41% of the deaths among newborn girls. I don't think Wallace knows what goes on beyond his own insular belief system, because he's not actually out there living in the real world.
It's not okay to torture Canadian babies for the fun of it if I live in America. And it's also, if there's a Star Trek world in which there are vast civilizations in the universe, it's not okay to torture Klingon babies for the fun of it. This is a claim that not only transcends people groups on planet Earth, but it actually transcends groups in the galaxy, groups in the universe. How could such a claim exist?
Because you're making it. That doesn't make it objective. It means that you personally don't like the thing. And that's your right, of course, but You're still just projecting, just saying, well, I don't think it's right. That doesn't mean it's actually wrong, any more than saying, well, I think it's wrong, means that it's not right. Right and wrong are completely subjective concepts. Nothing is absolutely right, and nothing is absolutely wrong. If humans had never existed on this planet, if we'd never evolved at all, if no animal on this planet had ever developed any kind of intelligence whatsoever, then the idea of torturing babies for fun being wrong, that simply wouldn't exist. Heck, in the animal kingdom, we see predators purposely hunting down and killing the offspring of competing species just because they can. They don't eat them, they just wipe them out to make it easier for their own offspring to survive. Welcome to nature. Maybe you ought to learn something about it before you make a complete fool of yourself because, at the moment, that's all you're doing.
Let me just offer to you why we think it's grounded in the nature of God. Because think about this. All moral claims are simply a claim and an obligation.
An obligation to who? Remember, we're going to expect you to back it up with independent verifiable evidence, so think before you speak. Claims mean absolutely nothing, even the claim that a God exists, unless you can prove it. Make sure you've got something to present before you try to go down that road. And this is where we see that everything he's saying is nothing but blind faith. It's not independent fact, it's just my fifis. He just doesn't care if it's true. None of them do. He's just riding on pure fifis and faith, and that's simply not impressive to anybody that has two brain cells to rub together. You know, anybody but Wallace and his followers.
Think about that. You ought not steal from somebody. It's an obligation. You ought not do this. And obligations are always between persons.
Well, that's not really accurate, is it? Remember, morals always come from enlightened self-interest and empathy. I don't want to be stolen from, therefore I reason that I shouldn't steal from other people in hopes that they will reciprocate. I don't want to be murdered, therefore I don't murder, yada yada yada. It has nothing at all to do with any kind of obligation. It has to do with individual survival and trying to maintain a cohesive, coherent social structure. Wallace has absolutely no clue what the hell he's talking about. He hasn't done any actual research. He's just spouting feel-good nonsense because that's all he's got in that tiny little brain of his. Maybe he should try to do better, but I wouldn't be holding my breath.
Think about that. I could punch a table. There's no moral content there, but if I punch my neighbor, there's a moral issue there. Because moral obligations are not between inanimate objects, they're between persons. You are not morally obligated to physics. Physics cannot provide you with moral obligations. Moral obligations cannot be grounded in physics because moral obligations are grounded and exist between persons. Therefore, if there are objective, transcendent moral obligations...
There's that if again. Note that in a second, he's going to pretend it's because there is an objective, transcendent moral obligation without any evidence whatsoever to get him from if to because he doesn't actually care. This is all about emotions, not evidence. It's too hard for the religious to actually have to think about their morals and work out the ways in which they can rationally justify them. It's far easier to just read a book of mythology and do whatever it says mindlessly because that's what these people are. Mindless. Reality is difficult, people. Sorry, but that's true. If you don't like that, too bad. But they don't, because they don't actually want to live in reality. They'd rather live in the childish fantasy land in their heads. And that's sad, isn't it?
Who is the objective, transcendent moral person to whom we're obliged?
No one. There is no evidence for any of this whatsoever. It's just ridiculous because these are little children desperately seeking out a magical father figure in the sky whose ass they can bow down and kiss. They can't think for themselves because the consequences for actually taking any accountability on their own are absolutely terrifying to them. It's why their religion comes up with rules for their followers to obey. Mostly for the benefit of the churches, if you notice. That's what religion is, after all. It's all about control. Give us your money and your obedience, and we'll make all kinds of empty promises, things that you can never actually prove, about what you'll get after you're dead and conveniently can't come back to let everybody know that it was all a scam. That's the reality that we're actually faced with. Wallace is just trying to con the rubes. Is anybody really surprised by that?
That's the problem. We cannot get these kinds of obligations in a universe that's governed by physics, but you could get these kinds of moral truths in a universe governed by a personal being who is the standard of moral truth.
You know, that thing you can't actually prove is out there. And that's why people pay to see Wallace talk. It's why they buy his books and listen to his podcasts and follow him around like puppies on a leash. They're desperately looking for comfort, not truth. Truth has nothing at all to do with religion. Religion is a scam, and far too many people are either too desperate or too stupid to think for themselves. And that's why they want morons like Wallace to shear them of their money and dignity, because it's a whole lot easier to be a sheep than an intellectually credible human being. Knowledge can be a scary thing if you're not ready for it. And that's why the religious are all so incredibly dumb. Anyway, enough of that. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Also, there's one more video about Frank Turek's take on this. Maybe two from Turek, I don't know. But if you have seen any others, let me know. What other apologists are trying to push the idea of objective morality for personal gain? Send me links in the comments down below if you have, and I'll add them to the list. It's really kind of sad how many people buy into this crap for personal, emotional reasons. Lots of them aren't even religious, and that might be an even bigger crime against humanity than religion already is. But as we know, people are stupid, unfortunately, and God, that's depressing, isn't it? Please, let's try to make the world a better place to be. Teach people to use their brains for more than holding up their stupid religious hats.